Hey everybody, how the fuck are you doing? I'm having a hell of a morning here. Anyway, so today is our latency demonstration, and as I'm finding out, a lot of the little techniques I want to show you guys what to avoid are really fucking up my screen cap software. It just decides to stop recording audio all of a sudden, then I have to re-record everything, so super happy about that. Anyway. Okay, so I'm just checking my levels over here, making sure I'm good. Yeah, this is the third time doing this, so hopefully I don't fuck this up too bad. Okay, basically, the long and short of it is, latency is how long it takes a signal to get into your system, be processed, and then spit back out. And there's all kinds of different drivers here in Reaper you can use. And I've got a second demonstration using the Focusrite 2i2, just a small one. But for right now, I've got my RME Fireface. This is my day-to-day recording interface I use. It's magnificent, and it does all kinds of things really well. So we've got a bunch of different driving options. We've got WDM kernel streaming, which I used to use back in the early 2000s. I haven't really touched since about 2003. Direct sound, forget that. Wave out, forget that. Dummy audio, definitely not. WAS API, have not really tried that or monkeyed around. I don't have the knowledge, but what I keep coming back to here is ASIO. And this stands for Audio System In-Out. It's a driver system that was invented by Steinberg. It's been around for a couple decades now, and it works great, and it seems to be the default standard. Back in my SAW Studio days, I was in some of the early Sonar software, I was using WDM. But when I switched over to SAW, I went with ASIO, and I seem to be really happy with that. Reaper, I've never really been able to seem to get WDM working correctly. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. If I switch to WDM, all I get is this. And it says max 2 inputs and outputs. Here's the weird thing, and this is where it really becomes interesting, is in my screen, or if I pull up my, if I go back to ASIO here, it gives me access to all my ins and outs, which is really important because I use multiple systems. I use the 12 inputs on the RME, but I'm also using another 8 on the Audient ASP 880, and then I plan on adding in a Focusrite Octoprix Dynamic as well for extra outboard channels and whatnot. So I need all those channels happening. The interesting thing, if I switch to WDM, is it really screws with my screen cap software. It doesn't like those drivers at all. So we're going to stay on ASIO and make sure everything's still running. And I'm just going to pull this up, make sure we're still recording here. Because when I switched on WDM last time, it just stopped. And I had no idea, so I kept rambling into a camera and had no audio. So ASIO does the trick for me anyway. And like is how much time it takes to get a signal in and out of your system. And we go into our ASIO configuration here. We've got a buffer list. Now, this is where I also got screwed on the first video. Okay, I can't hit 32 samples here, even though the RME does it fine. It screws with my screen cap software. So I can go 64 samples or up and above. Like if I set this to 2048 and hit OK. Okay, so because my screen cap software hates me, I've had to reset everything and do this as a separate shot. So I've got my buffer set to 2048. And I'm not there. I'm not hitting OK on anything, because every time I do that, it seems to destroy the sound on my screen cap. So we're not going to do that. But I just want to demonstrate what latency really happens and why it's impractical for tracking live things like amp sims. So we're at 2048 buffer. Yeah, that's really not cool. So it's very important that we get low latency happening and go back to 64 milliseconds, which is going to be the next shot, which I already shot. Like I said, my screen cap software hates me. This is going to be much easier to work with. Pretty simple stuff, actually. The trade-off being, when you use low latency, you're increasing your CPU load, meaning your computer's not going to be able to do as much in terms of effects and processing and that kind of thing. So if you've got a lot of tracks with a lot of effects, you might want to increase that latency and free up your computer. It just makes it work a whole lot harder when you have low latency drivers going. So if you've got an older PC or something like that, that's something you're going to have to constantly keep in mind, what your buffer is set to and how many tracks you're trying to run through, and if things are getting sluggish. You can increase your buffer size, but it increases the latency. And that noticeable delay that you just saw there, that's going to happen with all your fader moves and EQ moves as well. So I guess the lesson here is get a fast PC. Fortunately for most of us, even a reasonably priced PC these days is going to be fantastic for audio production. Back in the early 2000s, it was a bit more of a struggle. I used to run like one of the first instances of Sonar, and I had to constantly struggle with something called dropouts, where the system would just stop playing because it couldn't keep up with the demand I was placing on it. As computers got faster and faster, they were able to handle a lot more audio and a lot more processing, and now we're able to do really cool things like, work with the Fortin Nameless over here and that kind of thing, and do amazing amp sims and do really cool stuff, just all in software right on our PCs. So we're going to switch over to the Focusrite 2i2 for a second here and show you guys how that works. Okay, so what I've done is I've switched over to the Focusrite 2i2 just to kind of show you guys how you could use this in a typical home recording setup. And I got to say, I'm pretty impressed with the ASIO drivers on this one as well. I've switched over right here, as you can see on the ASIO control panel. I'm at 16 samples buffer size, and you know what, it feels great in the headphones. You can switch between, there's a little switch here to switch between direct monitoring on and off, so you're actually hearing what's coming directly out of the headphones, as opposed to real-time playback like you would here in Reaper. You can turn that on and off. Now I'm not hearing anything, and then I'm back on, and yeah, we're good to go. Now the thing is, I'm using the direct preamps on the Focusrite, which are pretty good, but again, there's no patch points, so I can't loop a compressor into the voice stream like I normally do on most of my videos. The other downside is, when using an amp sim like this, and I want to record with screen cap software, I'm just getting the clean section because I don't have loopback. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to listen to the playback in software here and just record a few notes and hopefully get to play this back on a render where I get these on separate tracks. We'll take a look. And I gotta say, yeah, that's really damn impressive. I like that an awful lot. That's at 16 samples of latency. I can't believe that. Again, it's a fairly powerful PC, so it can definitely handle it. And it's only got 2 channels, whereas, the RME is like about 1 billion. So there is that. Point being is, yes, use your ASIO drivers and experiment around with the system you have and the amount of inputs you have and see just how fast you can get it running. The lower the number of samples, the better. Your amp sims are going to feel better. They're going to respond better. And you're just going to have a better time recording, especially if you're recording a drummer with real-time effects. Like if you want to put compression and EQ on all the mics, that kind of thing, which is how I do it. You're going to want to get your latency as absolutely low as possible. And you're going to want to avoid plugins that offer or that drop in a whole lot of extra latency, because you'll hit the snare and then you'll hear the sound in the headphones a split second later, and that's just not going to be much fun at all. And we're back on this shot. Yeah, the clip you just saw was from like 2 days ago when I shot the first part of this and went back through and saw where I hit 32 samples of latency, and it just all this weird artifacting happened. Like, well, that's no good. So yeah, we're back here, and just a quick recap. You want to get your latency as low as possible when you're tracking real-time stuff. Just remember, you're going to need a faster CPU, especially to have multiple inputs going, like on a drum set where you might have, anywhere between 8 to 14 microphones happening, all being processed. The other thing to keep in mind is certain plugins will introduce latency, and you want to stay away from the look-ahead plugins like mastering limiters and things like drum leveler and that kind of thing when you're tracking live anyway, because they'll introduce a noticeable delay. Drives the drummers insane. You hit the snare and half second later you hear it in the headphones, that kind of thing. So anything look-ahead you're going to want to stay away from. So, like I said, some of the mastering plugins like the L3 Multi-Maximizer has a ton of latency. It's a cool program, but yeah, you definitely don't want to use it live, that's for sure. You want to stick to the ones that are going to have a low CPU load. And you can see that right on Reaper and see just how much latency it's adding here. It looks like it's adding 64 samples of latency for that guitar plugin. Not bad at all. That's pretty efficient. That's some damn fine programming there. Anyway, hopefully this clears things up for you, because I know a lot of you guys might be afraid to ask what exactly is latency, especially if you're new and that kind of thing. So hopefully this helps out, and make sure you watch for another episode in this series. Thanks again for downloading. Thanks for being a newsletter subscriber. You guys rule. Take care.